This is the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Welcome, everyone, to Lekker Rugby Pod. As you know, we try to have people on all the time that tell us what we're looking at. Matt Pierce is one of the best in the business at telling us what we're actually watching during a game, like what the story is, what the narrative. Heineke Meyer can point out a guy 20 years old, and then a decade later, he's still part of the golden generation. There are people like Andre Pretorius that can look back and say what happened. Once upon a time, I met a guy at a game who could tell me what the very next play would be. I met a man named Angus. And it's interesting because at the very same venue, the Sharks versus Claremont at the Stoop in London, there was Sia Khaleesi, there was Jim Hamilton, there was Flip van der Merwe, there was Marco Massotti holding court, giving us filet mignon. And I was drawn to this guy named Angus because sitting with him, he was literally telling me where the box kick would land, what the double move would be, where the second wave, who would hold, who would fold. And I remember thinking, now this guy is an analyst. I mean, there's a lot of people online saying they're analysts. Our guest today, Angus, he is known as Analyst Gus. He's actually Gus Usher, but I knew him as Angus, and that's how we're going to talk to him on this show. He is the man who can rip up a sport. So he's not just confined to rugby. He's worked for a very, very top premier soccer team. He has a really keen insight onto how depth really works in today's world. And we are really happy to welcome him to Lekker Rugby Pod. Angus, how are you doing?
Thank you, Harry. That was a very generous introduction. I think you've flattered me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on here. As I've always said, talking about rugby is my passion. So to sit on a podcast like this with you guys is a pleasure.
Rugby's a bit still growing into professionalism, right? I mean, in other sports, the idea that someone who's a really top analyst, sometimes there's a bank of analysts at top teams, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, the Premiership of football. I mean, there's 10 guys, 7 guys, 5 guys. In rugby, it's considered odd to even have a couple. And a lot of times they are retired players or former players, not necessarily drawn from the top level of analyst science. Talk to me a little bit about, what you've seen, because you've been in different sports and different levels. Where are we in rugby? Are we still trying to get professional?
Yeah, rugby's a bit behind in the sense of the kind of level of analysis that we're doing, as well as the financial resources really putting into it. And that is down to how essentially these sports evolve. Once you start seeing the financial reward for analysis, you start seeing the resources put back into it. But it is a slow burn. We're seeing that in American sports, obviously, is generally the pioneer for a lot of this kind of impact of analysis. And when you break it down financially, you can see why teams do it, because the finances that go into paying a team of analysts is a fraction of what you're going to pay for a single new star player.
At its essence, in its basics, you're looking at trends. You're spotting trends, you're predicting then, as you were sitting next to me, the Stoop, and you were literally telling me with, Claremont ownership in front of us and, Kevin Peterson to our right, Tim Clark, the golfer behind us. You were calling plays and you were confident about it. I mean, you were saying them loud and they were coming true. Okay, you might have missed like 1 or 2. But the point is, like, if you can have that, if I know what my opposing tight head's going to do when I lock down as a loose head, when I know as a, midfielder, where that is the pass going out the back? Is it going to be a triple pod, a diamond pod? This is incredible advantages. How did you get to that point? What is the process by which you studied the patterns and shapes of rugby enough to be able to do that?
I guess like everyone, we all start as just fans of the game. You have a passion for the sport in a playing sense and in a kind of a watching sense. So you enjoy from that perspective, and I always did. And I started at a very young age. I started refereeing rugby at 13 alongside.
This in Durban, or where was it?
In South Africa at my senior school in the Midlands, Myklaus. And I started refereeing at a young age because I wanted to do more than just play. I wanted to be involved in the technical process. And then started introducing sort of video analysis at the end of things, where we started looking at clips for the first team and properly like taking into account what was going on in a rugby match. And that really passed on to my time in the UK, where I first moved over to the UK to coach sport, and was coaching and introducing analysis as well, until I stumbled along a master's program at a university in the south of England called Chichester, where I took on a master's in sports analysis, a specific master's course in that sort of field. And that was something that I never knew existed, especially growing up in South Africa, where your sporting degrees is really limited to HKE, human kinetics, really, as your only sporting route in South Africa from a kind of higher education perspective. So having the opportunity to do a master's in sports analysis just really piqued my interest. And from there, it's only grown. Working at Ealing Trailfinders was another kind of rugby step for me, but the skills you learn from a course like that just fall on top of your passion, your pre-existing passion for the sport.
Yeah, so Ealing is a team in that division right below the Premiership, correct?
Yeah.
And they've typically been quite a powerhouse. Do you find there's a little more freedom sometimes when you're working with a team like that? Because maybe you can try a few more things. It's not life or death.
Definitely, and they had a large emphasis on rugby analysis at the club. Considering they, as you say, are in the division below the Premiership, they still had, at that time, we had 6 analysts, spread across some interns, 2 at the academy, 4 with the first team, and then actually technically a 7th analyst who was doing a recruitment analysis. So that's quite a substantial amount of capital put into analysis as a whole, and comparing that to a lot of South African rugby teams which don't really have that sort of resource, at a much higher level of rugby, it shows the emphasis being placed on it.
Yeah, and so you're part of that talented diaspora that's all over the world right now, and there's almost a shame, there's almost a sadness, and also a pride, I think, amongst all of us. We go, what if we could somehow aggregate all that and get it together and sort of bring it back? And I think that's kind of what Rassie's thinking is. When I look at it's the same players, the core group, when he took it over, it was the depth of analysis, the preparation for a particular opponent, always throwing people curveballs, being the most difficult team in the world to prepare for, basically, the Boks. And when I looked, I was in Murrayfield, I was able to be close to the Boks and listen to what was going on. And it was real-time trend finding, trend confirmation, Scotland deviating, therefore we adjust. This is a high-level operation right now. So when we look now at this year, we sort of look at the Holy Trinity, can the Boks win in Eden Park? Can they go to France and win? And can they also knock off Ireland and Dublin? Talk to me about what you see shaping up here. I mean, I know Georgia, Italy, I know, French didn't send top teams, but what are we looking at as we look across these, antagonists? The Irish sort of getting a prep season in the Lions and so forth. And what's emerging in your mind in 2025?
I mean, those 3 games you've mentioned are really difficult matches to win. You would have to play the kind of numbers game and look across those 3 matches. If you're assigning them a difficulty rating for all 3 of them and then trying to win all 3 of them, the likelihood of winning all 3 of them is lower than I think many South African fans may believe. And those are likely the 3 toughest games in rugby. Obviously, we have to exclude ourselves because that's impossible. So those are the 3 toughest games from our perspective in rugby right now. And all of them have a bit of a grudge associated to them as well. The French game, they will want revenge for the 2023 Rugby World Cup. Ireland and South Africa have had this sort of rivalry in recent years as well. And of course, the New Zealand rivalry is long standing, as well as that Eden Park. Well, I think they'll probably play more on South Africa than it will on New Zealand. But trying to break that Eden Park record will be a huge kind of target for the South African team.
Yeah, you would think of those 3 The All Blacks are smarting still. They don't feel good about. I think the idea of going to losing a 5 game streak against the Boks is just the kind of horror misery that Razor Robinson can use. Do you want to be the team that loses 5 in a row to the Boks? So that's built in us against the world. I think you're right about the French. They reject that game. That didn't happen. Wasn't true. It was you cheated. Whatever. So he can use that. Galtier can use that. It's the Irish one that I almost look forward to the most, just because I think I'm really tired of it, and I really want to see. I want to be there and see that result. When you look at those 3 matches, which one gets you the most sort of, you know, analyzed up? The one that makes the analyst Gus excited?
I would say it's going to be Eden Park purely because of the history of it. I think to be able to beat this All Blacks team with again they've had a bit of a kind of adjustment to the way things were done in 2024. Razor Robertson is trying new things. He's got some new kind of faces into the lineup. We're going to see a bit of a change of direction from them, I believe, and it's going to be a bigger challenge than it was last year. I mean, we got to take into account the fact that even though we won both those games on South African soil, there was touch and go in both of them. And although there were factors that also need to be taken into account from South Africa's perspective of a lot of players who were missing at times, and there was a lock crisis that we now look at and think it's incredible that we have had a lock crisis a year ago, and now we're able to release a lock and only have 6 in our squad. So we are terribly lucky that kind of era of lock crisis is almost seeming to wane away now. We seem to be in a position now as South African rugby where can confidently say we don't have a depth issue in any position. And with that in mind, I think New Zealand are building the exact same thing. They were in a lock crisis of their own, and now with Holland coming through and a few others, they are in a very similar strong position.
You're 100%. And it's interesting when the Springboks are the chased now. They are not the chaser. And they definitely have built more depth. So what we have is depth, but we only get to put 15 guys on the field at a time. And the choices therein can be important against the All Blacks on their home patch, because they're going to come rip-roaring out of that darkness. There's just going to be a lot of pent-up fury. I also noticed that Razor is putting people in the right positions now. So he's moved Ricky Ioane to the wing. He's got Ardie Savea playing the small forward as opposed to being the big carry 8, which opens up, a big carry 8 and a big monster at 6. They're 6, R7. And they've got the big Dutchman at lock. So their scrum is solid. Their lineout's dangerous. It just sort of comes down to, and their 9 is amazing. So it just comes down to their 10, doesn't it? Like who is the fly-off that plays at Eden Park for the All Blacks?
I think it would still likely be Beauden Barrett, unless something changes with Richie Mo'unga and anything were to change on that front, which I doubt is going to happen. It would still likely be Beauden Barrett. I think from an experience point of view, he is still probably the number one in a big match scenario. Damien McKenzie was trusted for a lot of last year, but I believe if you are giving the All Blacks a World Cup final tomorrow, they would still be choosing Beauden Barrett.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? That, it might roll around that it's Andre Pollard, Beauden Barrett. It's almost like these guys, they just stay around forever. Sometimes someone challenges for their jersey, but there's something about time in the saddle. The other thing that is remarkable is Beauden Barrett's never been good against the rush, blitz, out and in defense. He's always struggled a bit, but he's still better than Damien McKenzie at doing it. Not as good as Richie Mo'unga. What is the way as a 10? You see, with the New Zealand guys not able to play against a proper, Nienaber, triple B kind of blitz defense, they kind of shocked at first. What is the right way to attack the Bok defense? Do you have to play back to go? Do you have to go play back to get around the blitz defense, or is a better option sort of over it, the chips, the grubbers, the diagonals, or is it sort of a mixture of all that?
It's the variety, I believe. You've got to have more than one way of approaching it. If you try and put all your eggs in the kicking basket, and you try and win the battle through kicking alone, whether it be short kicks to get over the defense or just kicks to kind of put the team under pressure, you can't rely on that alone. That alone is not enough. There has to be a power game element where your forwards are able to carry in that tight, where the blitz has less of a blitz, essentially. There's less time for them to kind of make that gain line against you, or essentially stop your gain line. So that's where that attack that France brought in the 2023 World Cup quarterfinal was so devastating for our defense, and they scored so many points against us because they just kept the ball alive tight around that ruck area where they were just carrying and carrying and carrying. They didn't allow us to get up off the line and halt any momentum. And that momentum just slowly gathered to the point where our fanning defense, our more width rushing, was starting to struggle to be able to keep with that kind of losing of momentum. So then you started losing your numbers out wide, and then you're at a shortage when it comes to the ball actually going out wide by the French.
It's interesting. The three antagonists of the Boks, they approach it very different ways. For the All Blacks, if they couldn't get pay off the first starter play and maybe the second ruck, it would decelerate it, and they couldn't really put together 12 phases at Ellis Park or Cape Town. Ireland comes right up the middle and does multi-sided. So you have a ruck in the middle, and it's flip, 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 left, right, left, right, left, right, and then they decide which side in the end is going to win. And then the French, like you say, it depends a lot on quick hands too. They just keep that ball spinning around. Louis Bielbarré obviously is trying to be a leckerback. We call them leckerbacks, the mysteriously scrum cap, physically dominant superpower wings. And so are the French copying us a bit? What's the clash of styles here? Which is the most different of the top four?
They are all so different. I'd say Ireland's an interesting one because they are very much structured phases of play. It's very structured. It's very technical.
Everyone has to know where they are, correct? Like you have to
Absolutely.
be in the right spot. Yeah. Wh-
Unbelievably structured play, and it comes from their systems. They build everything from such a young age. The structures are all there. The Leinster structures obviously play a huge role in the national team structures. So it's very structured phase play. Something that very few other teams have, even close to. Um, the French obviously were basing it a lot off like individual talent on the wings, and what the kind of you have those crazy moments by just very skillful players, as well as their power game from their forwards pack, very strong forwards pack, but also just that kind of bringing that element of French flair that has been some way removed. They haven't had the same sort of amount of flair as they had in the past, because obviously that opens you up to a lot of issues from a statistical standpoint. You're essentially you're throwing the dice a bit with that game plan sometimes. And the New Zealanders, they've kind of kept to their roots, but have definitely introduced more of a kind of kicking game over the years. They've really added that extra element of those wide spray kicks, to try and beat defensive lines. And in our case, they did that really well in the 2019 World Cup. That amazing example of I mean, that is 6 years ago now, but that amazing example of the ball across to Reese.
Sever Reece. Yeah.
Reese, yeah. He was essentially that was the prime example of, I think, that one of the first times we saw teams trying to just do that spray kick to beat the rush defense.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you've positioned the French as kind of a moment team, sort of a frenzy, but can they hang on at the end? They overplayed themselves in the quarterfinal and ran out of petrol at the end. Um, the All Blacks seem to be the most traditional. It's very funny. They're the most traditional of the top four, in my opinion, now. And then they're looking across at Bok tactics and going, no, we don't want to do that. No, we're just going to stick with this, this, and this. It's the Irish that seem to be the team we should beat, but have the hardest time beating. So kind of explain that to me. What is it about playing a highly structured team? We should be able to handle structure. We're physical, more physical than them. We've got, one-on-one better athletes. Why is it that that system troubles us even in Durban?
It's a difficult one to answer. I wish I knew the I wish I knew the answer, but I believe there's a few factors that are at play in the Irish setup and how they have a really good time against a lot of South African teams. Um, the structure can unlock defensive lineups in different ways. We've seen how a more passive Scottish defense really struggled against the structure of Ireland over the years, um, because it's given them that extra time to essentially get to the latter stages of whatever phase play they may be doing. If it is a sort of set move where you've got that wrap around and a pass to the boot, and then that instead of a South African setup where you are stopping that at maybe two or three passes, the Scottish defense was allowing it to get to three or four passes before they were even getting up to the line. And we saw that cause a lot of problems for the Scottish defense. For us, it's almost that the Irish, because of their structure and technical ability, skillful, silky hands, etc., they are able to create moments where they know how South Africa are going to defend to it. They know if they have the set play coming off the back of a central ruck that has already come off the back of, say, a set piece from a line out, they know that if the ball goes out wide to the open side and Jesse Creel is the one defending, they are quite sure of who he's going to be rushing. And if they can get that little tip pass away, what that means for the subsequent outcomes. So it a rush defense opens you up to a lot of success in certain ways, but it is also somewhat predictable because if you force certain triggers, you know that there's going to be a moment where there's going to be a Springbok 13 running at a certain outside back. And if you can get that ball away from them, you've opened yourselves up possibly a 3v1, regardless of the covering that is coming.
This is so good. Okay, so it's almost like the blitz needs a fake blitz, and you're going to have to institute almost a feint in there. And the problem with the blitz, which obviously requires someone to come out of the line. So some teams call it a shooter, some people call it the rover back, but you go behind enemy lines. You sometimes you're salient, you bulge, and you do it on purpose. But maybe it becomes for an Andy Farrell led team too analyzable. And this is interesting a comment. So the last three, maybe four matches with Ireland has been low scoring, and maybe the Irish have said to themselves, we're going to not score too much either. We're going to go into the swamp. It's going to be highly physical. Like Durban was one of those physical matches you've seen, in ages, people breaking bones and such. But we're going to be there at the end and just hang in there and soak it up. Whereas maybe the French try to go, well, we're gonna match you and outscore you. Ireland's almost committed to this patient play. And then I look at Ty Byrne, guys like that, they remind me of Kieran Reid, the ability to have big guys in the trams with good hands who can offload, and that's all you need is one or two of those. So I'm getting ready for these games now. I'm excited. So the big advantage we have over all these teams is proven depth. Not depth on the potential. This is like you've done a great job of depicting this, and a lot of people still doing these depth charts where it's very rigid. There's a first line player, there's a second line, and the third string. This is not how Rassie's playing rugby. He's building, and you've showed it in a Venn diagram. So everyone go on your socials and watch this, and we'll put this on the screen. But you some locks play flank, some flanks can go 8, some cannot. In the back line, there's very few players that only play one position anymore, except for obviously nines have a certain specialty factor, and we get into the props as well. But 12 of the 15 positions can float here. They must float here and there because that's what the Springbok setup wants. When you look across that, do you see a grand plan, or is it just stuffing depth in there in case of injuries and loss of form and whatever? Is there an actual setup here where you think Rassie and Co are looking 2 years ahead, 2-3 years ahead?
I think you have to look at it from two different perspectives. You have one that is creating depth in the sense of allowing you to have options in positions in case of injuries and emergencies. So you you don't want to come around to a World Cup where you've been playing 36 players all year, or all cycle, and you get to the World Cup and you have four major injuries in maybe, let's say, the loose forward and lock region. And now you're having to bring people into your system that have had no exposure to the system, and now they're making their debut at a World Cup semi-final, a World Cup quarterfinal, whatever it might be. Of course, that's normal. We understand coaches don't want that to happen. That's pretty basic depth building. But another aspect of it that you have to take into account is we have this long season where we essentially have a never-ending season in South Africa at the moment. And that rotation of players is also playing a big role in the way we are able to manage players, because we also have another aspect, which is our our aging core group of the 2019 team that was essentially built for the 2027 World Cup. I mean, sorry, the 2023 World Cup, that it wasn't built for a 2027 World Cup. Rassie spoke at length in 2018 about how the squad that he was building wasn't really. I mean, he didn't say it in 2018, but he mentioned that was the plan in 2018. That the squad was being built for 2023. That was it. It was age profiles being built for 2023. We're now going into the 2027 World Cup with a lot of those core players still around, and that's difficult because form can drop off at any point in time. Age can catch up a player at any point in time. You can have players playing incredibly well 1 minute and falling off form, age-wise, physicality-wise, in 6 months. And I think we've seen that mentality in the way he's trimmed the squad more recently. He's trimmed a player like Makazole Mapimpi, who's actually had a brilliant URC campaign. He was fantastic during the URC. But if you're playing the numbers game, you still got to look at him as he's one of the oldest players in the squad, and he's a winger, which is generally the first position that begins to fail you in age. You don't have many wingers on the circuit who are 35-year-old plus. And at this rate, I believe Mapimpi is going to be 36 at the next World Cup, maybe older. So it is a risk. Even if he's playing well now, it is a risk to still invest resources into a player who could well fall off form entirely by the next World Cup. And all those caps that he's essentially swallowed up haven't gone to a Edvald van der Merwe, who needs to learn the systems, needs to become more integrated, needs to understand things more, gain more experience, and won't be at a worrying age in the next World Cup.
Yeah, that's fascinating too. It's almost like I say I shouldn't say it's a group of coaches and they're all thinking together, but the coaches of the Boks are allowing some of these grand old warriors. I've always thought that if we tested Makazole Mapimpi, that he just doesn't develop lactic acid. He's like one of those. There's a mutation in humans that people can run ultra marathons and they don't develop it, so they don't have any reason to stop running. They can just run forever. But I mean, in general, you look at 2015, the semifinal against the All Blacks, one of the greatest All Blacks teams ever, and you had Frans Malherbe, Louis de Jager, Eben Etzebeth, Sia was in the squad, Peter Steff in the squad, Dwayne. You had Andre Pollard, Damon Dialende, and Jesse Creel on the field in the semifinal, and Willie Roux at the back. It's almost preposterous. I mean, any team would love to have that ability. You know, Ben Darwin talks a lot about cohesion theory and so forth. But now people just play everywhere. You know, the Bok team is spread far and wide. A lot of it's in Japan. We're sort of giving up on that idea of day-to-day cohesion. We're just doing memories. You know, it's like DNA. It's almost like, yeah, but you played together when you were 14, you know, and so now it comes back together. Do you think this is going to work, or will it have to have, with those old warriors, are they going to get to 2027? I mean, how is that even possible that Eben, Louis, these guys, France, these guys could still have enough mileage in their legs?
Again, similar to what I've just mentioned about the whole idea of caps being these resources. You've already put a whole bunch of those resources into those senior players. So they need less caps, they need less resource and everything put into them to still perform at, say, the 2027 World Cup. So what you then need to do is you then need to manage them physically. A good example, say, being Bongi Mbonambi. He is a player who I'm sure Rassie wants to take to the 2027 World Cup if he's still playing at a good level, but he wouldn't be seen as a starter. He wouldn't probably even be seen as a player who makes the 23. But he'd be seen as a player in a similar sense to Dwayne Vermeulen was, who would be seen as a player who, if he's needed, he knows everything about how the Springboks play. He knows absolutely everything in and out. He's one of the most experienced players around, and he'll be able to do a great job if called upon. But to do that, you need to start making those difficult calls quite early. You need to start, and here in 2025, 2 years out from a World Cup, you need to start saying, well, we're giving Marnus van der Merwe some chances at hooker. We're giving Wessels a chance to play both loose head and hooker. We're giving these other players opportunities to get these reps in. Essentially, you refer to them, get these reps in training, get these game weeks where it's not just about being in the lineup for the weekend. It's about the whole process of being in that starting first team training during the week. You aren't in the squad that's preparing the first team for a game. You are the ones being prepared. It's a different mentality. And these players need to get exposed to those situations often, because if you don't expose them, they will arrive at a World Cup without the same experience you kind of require for big moments.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've always found, when you take your Venn diagrams, and everyone go on Analyst Gus to check them out on social media. But let's just take lock 6, 7, 8 together, because now they almost become this back five. There's only 4 guys in your Venn diagrams that are just locks, and they don't do anything else but lock. Lewitt, Eben, Salman, and Argia. That's it. Everyone else has an overlap. Nortje can play 7 as well as lock. Mostert has had a career floating between the two. Kubas Visa is increasingly seen as someone who's a floater, can play all over the place now, 8. Talk to me about a guy like Jean-Luc Dupree. So when I hear you saying, I think people that have sort of 10 to 20 caps really need to get into that 30 to 40 range by 2027. And that means you have to pick someone. You got to pick between a Ruiz and a Dupree and a Hanekom. You cannot just keep going, you get 4 here, you get 2 here, you get 3 there. That's not how Dwayne Vermeulen became Dwayne Vermeulen, a late bloomer as well. Chatuka, you have Kwacha Smith can play, all over the place. The only guys that look specialists in the loose forwards are Marco van Staden, because Marco's really just, he's a 6. He's an open sider. And then you have Jasper Wiese at 8. You cannot see Jasper anywhere else besides that. So talk to me about how you think that'll play out. Is there a front runner for the blind side role, beyond Peter Steph? Is there someone a front runner if Sia doesn't get there with his legs?
It's difficult. I guess the first thing I think I would mention is we look at the squad that we announced for this June, July internationals that have just passed. That was around 55 players at the beginning of it, including Jean Klein, who ended up pulling out injured, etc. And not included in that 55 players was your kind of Ulrich Loh, who's injured and is brilliant. So we can't kind of forget him. Your Cameron Hanekom, who again had another brilliant season but is injured, and you definitely can't exclude him. So when you add those injured players who weren't able to be selected into the mix as well, Frans Malherbe, etc., you're looking at about 60, 65 players that are genuinely, as we saw, they almost, I think all of them, yeah, every one of those players in the squad played in those 4 matches between Barbarians, Italy, and Georgia. And then you add on these other 10 odd players of these guys that have been injured or not available. What you're talking about is about 65 players. And those have got to be weaned down to 33 players for the World Cup. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. A lot of fans online and everything seem to always talk about, okay, well, we need to have Ulrich Loh, Cameron Hanekom, Jasper Wiese, Siya Kolisi, Marco van Staden, and they ramble all these players. And I'm saying, well, unfortunately, you've listed how many players we can have in the forwards pack, not just the loose forwards. It is so difficult to kind of limit all of those positions down to then 33. All those players have to be weaned down to a small group. And the best way to do that and still make you feel covered in every position is to have players who can play multiple positions. And that's where this mentality comes in, is Rassie doesn't want to have one player in each position and then have to replace them if they get injured in the World Cup and fly someone in, etc., etc. They want to have that flexibility of having players who can play across multiple positions. So your 33-man squad is pretty covered as it is. And even though he won't do that because that would be a disadvantage, he would be comfortable almost having those 33 players. If two injuries happened that they thought, okay, those two injuries might be back in 2 weeks, they wouldn't need to replace them. If they were back in 3 weeks, they might not need to replace them either. It's a squad that doesn't need to make drastic changes because of a single injury that may last a few weeks. While other teams may, in the past, had a player who was going to be injured for a week or two and been, okay, sorry, we've got to replace you. We've got to get someone in. And that's a huge mentality shift, I think. You've got to now a platform where you can have 3 or 4 players covering one position, but also covering an entirely different position. And that allows you that depth and that rotation.
Yeah, and watching the Lions series play out, it almost like in a miniature version, because Australia is not, the best opposition nowadays. But it looked like Andy Farrell used some of those principles. He picked a team and a squad that was so like for like that it didn't really matter. I mean, like, let's say, what if you knocked out Tom Curry? So then in comes Jack Morgan. What if you knock out Jack? Then you got Josh van der Fleer. I mean, basically, you just keep rolling those guys out. At 8, he had people who were hybrids. Ty Byrne can float between lock and... So is it sort of the top teams are thinking that way now. What do you think about this? People in South Africa, we often complain and we say they're changing the rules or the focus, tweaking the laws or the emphasis to try and, hamstring us, to bring us down to earth. In my opinion, it's always helped because we have first mover advantage. We have a more agile coaching staff. We have more, just have sheer speed that, a Grant Williams can just run around your system, whatever your law shift is. Like, okay, I'll just run around you. Is this kind of a false complaint? Because I think whilst I would like rugby to stop changing so much actually and just sit for a while, I don't think it really hurts the Boks. Do you?
I think it's a bit of that, similar to that whole concept of survivor bias. You've got that scenario where the Springboks are testing the laws, moving things, and testing in a very much a broad fashion. They're not just testing in the kind of rudimentary, let's try and bend the rules here. They're also trying to do things differently within the rules that are normally seen as completely legal, but now they're doing it at a different angle that makes it seem like we are trying to reinvent the wheel. And I feel like the more innovation you have from a team, obviously there's going to be more likelihood that you are going to be then the ones who are causing a change in a law. I don't believe in any way that it's World Rugby sitting there going, okay, well, South Africa did this, therefore we need to change this. It's just a case of we are the ones doing a lot of innovation. Therefore, it's going to be off the back of a lot of things we do that laws may change. I would at least hope it's that way, and I definitely see it that way. But I believe if you saw New Zealand doing all these same things, laws would still change. Laws would still change. I think the main priority for World Rugby is, and they will always see it this way, is they want to try and make the game flow more interesting, etc. Sometimes I don't agree with the law changes they make, like goal line kickoffs. I mean, goal line kicks, because you've got, I think you're disadvantaging teams in certain ways because of that. But it's still, they are doing it for rugby's best interest. They don't mean any harm by these decisions. They just sometimes might make the incorrect decision, which is kind of a human error. It is typical of sports.
And I think it's kind of funny because the more you make it into a speed, agility, evasion game, Boks got plenty of that. including new communities that haven't played much rugby, who can probably step anybody in a phone box. And then you got, it's going to be pure power, obviously we've got that. So to me, the blend of the power and the pace is always going to be where the game is, because you're searching for mismatches of power or mismatches of pace and space. I'll do this little trick that I've done with a lot of coaches, and I like it from an analyst brain. If I give you 5 of something before a game starts, I'm going to grant you these wishes. I'm going to give you these 5. You got to pick one that you like. So 5 line breaks, 5 scrum penalties, 5 stolen lineouts, or 5 regained kicks. Which one do you pick?
I think statistically, 5 scrum penalties or 5 regain kicks would probably be where you would get the most points off the back of it. It would mainly depend on where those 5 regain kicks were and where those 5 scrum penalties were. I guess if those scrum penalties are all in your opponent's half, that means your 10 can kick that into the corner, and you've got 5 opportunities during a game for a maul try, as well as the territory you may gain off the back of it if it was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I should have put it as everyone. It's on halfway. All those things happen exactly on the 50.
Yeah, I would say scrum penalties. I think those 5 scrum penalties will gain you 30, 40 meters plus possession, plus you're now, even if it were an unsuccessful maul or line out move off the back of it, you still gain that territory. So I think that's a clear front runner for me.
Okay, so you're getting to the 5 or 10 for free, basically. Or if you're like Finn Russell, recently in the second test in Melbourne, he walked about 10 meters forward under the ref's nose to get that extra 10. So shape of the game, what do you see as the next move for Rassie, Camp Rassie, like, and Tony Brown and Felix Jones? What do you think it looks like, let's say, for the next 24 months? Is it this promised Tony ball we've been talking about, or is it just continue doing everything just a little bit better?
I mean, it will be a combination of the both. Everything's got to improve. Every team needs to diversify the way they approach rugby. You can't have one game plan. You have to have a plan A, B, and C nowadays. But also, everything needs to, the marginal improvements on all of those game plans also needs to be there. You want to, I mean, that's what analysts do half the time. We provide training data and match data, and we say, well, players did X, Y, and Z. This is where we would expect them to be in a few weeks' time. We want certain things to improve in certain areas. I think sometimes people don't realize that when in rugby we see a player pass the ball, generally a fan will say, oh, it was a good pass because it was a very long, flat pass or something. But from an analysis perspective, we rate the passes to 3, 4 different categories. You've got an excellent pass where it's right in the bucket and it's a flat pass. Then you've got kind of a low pass, a higher pass. All of those are rated and then graded over time. And if a player's constantly throwing those bad passes where they're not right where you would expect them to be, even though those are marginal gains where the player may lose a bit of speed or the likelihood of dropping the ball may increase, etc., those all are taken into account. And a player won't get away with that forever. They're allowed a bad game here or there, but they can't constantly do that. Otherwise, there will be repercussions. So you find marginal gains in every area of the game, and it takes a lot of work, but it's impossible to rest on your laurels and not make those gains, because if you don't, you will fall behind the crop.
Such good stuff there, man. Angus, I do think, in tennis, a sport that I play quite a lot and at a pretty good level, it's interesting because some players are not good at knowing their percentages in the moment. So as they're playing the match, they don't know they're coming to the net and hitting and just committing to the fact that they're going to hit as many forehand volleys as possible is their best shot. Even if the first 4 times they go up there, it's terrible. They lose. An analyst or a coach will go, no, I want you there 100 times this match, because in the end, you're going to win 65 of those. And that's enough to win a match, but then they'll stay back at the back and say, no one's going to get over my head. I'm going to hit this ripping backhand. And you get 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, even if you do it 50 times. I think some players have that. I always look at a guy like Andre Pollard, for example, and I go, yeah, I think you think of percentages, and I think of other players as not having it in their head. Are you able to talk to players directly about that kind of stuff and sort of say, your best bet is when you are in this situation, doing this, maximize it, put yourself in that position as many times as possible?
The rugby world is a bit of a strange one in that way. You have some clubs that are more open to analysts having direct conversations with players. You have others where the process is generally the analysts feedback to the coaches and the coaches feedback to the players. But unfortunately, for the majority of cases, the data is often lost in this unfortunate chain of player misinformation. So very often in rugby clubs, I see players don't really get the full view of what's going on. They may be given a bit of a word from a coach saying, oh, your passing wasn't great or anything, but very seldomly do the players actually get the full picture. And I think that's quite disappointing. I think that's a big area of improvement for rugby, is these players often don't have their stats for a game. They don't have their stats for a season. They don't either get access to them, or there's reasons they're not given access to them. But I feel like that sort of transparency is crucial in helping players improve. Um, I've often had professional rugby players approach me online to ask me for data, and it's always incredibly ironic because you would think, well, you work in a professional environment with professional analysts and professional coaches, they should be able to provide you this data. So the fact that those players then approach me for data shows that lack of kind of there's not a unified data direction in a lot of these rugby clubs.
Yeah, it's surprising. You look at a guy like Afalele Fase and you go, if you had more one-on-ones in the air, if we could manufacture 6 or 7 of those in a match, I'm pretty sure that you're winning 3 or 4, maybe all of them, and you're in one of the most dangerous attacking positions, broken field, in rugby. Similarly, you look at a guy like Kanan Moody, so big and playing now on maybe even coming in from the edge into 13. To me, rugby will get to that next level when you manufacture those one-on-ones almost incessantly. Like, I'm going to pick on your 13 until he breaks, as opposed to, got to have the hard yards, earn the right to go wide immediately if I can feel that I can get a mismatch. Angus, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Listen, I'd love to talk with you again as some of these games play out now that we've given our mini predictions. But it looks like to me, Eden Park is still the hardest place to win a match in rugby if you're not a New Zealander. And that's what I'm looking forward to the most. Cheers, man.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
This is the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.